the officers were to arrest the people to prevent a breach of the peace. Serious breach of the peace.
It seems to be part of the British summer now, the confrontation between hippie travellers trying to set up a music festival and the police. Anyone who lives in the countryside of southern England or Wales must now expect to find himself suddenly caught in traffic jams at police roadblocks or mixed up in extraordinary convoys of battered buses, trucks and vans. Or he may come home to find the field down his peaceful country lane overflowing with straggle-haired young people, dogs, campfires and blaring sound systems. Then follows the painful ritual eviction. I witnessed the one in Hampshire where a council building had been burnt down.
I like that one. That man has stopped the convoy.
As the police spotter plane runs overhead, there are lines and lines of policemen coming up, each with in hand of one of these notices to quit, which they're handing out to all the travellers, and they're spreading through. Many of them are in riot gear, full riot gear, with helmets up, though, at this stage.
We would like you to leave.
I don't find an answer for that there.
We have come onto this site because of the amount of damage that's been done.
Why have you come with riot helmets on? And why have you come with visors on? And why have you come with battens? My friend.
You can't drive anywhere. What are you saying at? It's a field in the middle of nowhere. You're wasting money, you're wasting our planet, you're wasting time, you're wasting our time, you're wasting your own time. You're getting frustrated.
What I will say to you is this. We have come onto this site to take control of it. We have no intention of getting involved in any kind of difficulty with anybody on site. We've come here in a reasonable sort of way. We have told you that we would like you to leave. We would expect people to leave now who are in a position to do so. Good. There may be some who can't leave tomorrow because their vehicles are broken down. We will be reasonable.
I'm saying that what your stance is intimidating and threatening.
We have come here very friendly. We have stood here and talked to you. I have been personally abused. I've had people poking me in the back and in the kidneys for the last 20 minutes. We have been totally reasonable about this, and we are attempting to be reasonable with you now.
Well, I'd like to make one very important point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. There's a very large element of distrust amongst travellers because of unfortunate incidents in the past where vehicles have had all their windows smashed, where people have been injured by police officers. Now, in view of that huge level of distrust that a lot of us have, don't you think it's intimidating for you to spend the entire evening on this site? It is intimidating with the amount of distrust there is. It's going to make tensions run very high. That is not safe policing.
Well, I can tell you now that the mistrust that you talk about is mutual.
The shared experience of everyone involved in these confrontations that they all do distrust each other, feel intimidated. They also realize that a major social change is in progress, that there's a flight to the countryside of people, mostly young, who consider themselves marginalized by society. Probably the first time it really hit the national consciousness was in June 1985, when a group of what were then called hippies was stopped by police from conducting their annual pilgrimage to Stonehenge to celebrate the summer solstice. The landowner who first got wind of what was going on was Lord Cardigan, who found about 100 travellers' vehicles invading his estate in Savernake Forest outside Marlborough. He decided to follow them out of their camp next morning.
I followed out of sheer curiosity to see this extraordinary spectacle, because by then there were certainly 200 or 300 police on site as well. This entire extraordinary sight to get into Stonehenge. About 10 miles short of Stonehenge, they were stopped by the police, whereupon they turned off the A303 and went into a field. After a standoff for 2 or 3 hours, many hundred police went into the field and conducted the biggest mass arrest of civilians, I think, anywhere in this country since the Second World War. There was quite a lot of violence, most of it from the hippies. I saw 2 or 3 extremely disagreeable things at very close range, including a pregnant woman being handled in a most unfortunate manner by 3 policemen, all of whom had their numbers invisible. When next morning I was asked by the police would I agree to the riot police going into the camp and dealing with, that was their word, the women and children in the camp, I said thanks but no thanks. I've seen the violence handed out yesterday. I don't particularly want to see that on my own property here this Sunday morning. That doesn't mean I'm keen on these people breaking into my land. What I will do with my tenants, the Forest Commission, is to go first thing tomorrow morning to the High Court in London, and we will not throw them out using further blood and violence like was used yesterday. We will have them thrown out with due process of law and doing it a legal, quiet way rather than the way that was done on Saturday. Unfortunately, in that instant, the great myth of me standing between the police and the hippies, travellers, call them what you will, and therefore being on their side and therefore giving them sanctuary and therefore being one of them, was born. It's a good story, minor drawback, it wasn't true.
And so the annual ritual began. Stonehenge remained a main target for hippie travellers for some years, but they no longer bothered to try to get there in any numbers. The confrontations spread across the English and Welsh countryside, and there's now an annual list of where attempts to put on festivals will be made. Among the wide range of people who now call themselves travellers is one journalist, Alex Rosenberger, who's been on the road for 7 years. He's been researching their history.
The free festivals came about really out of the squatting movement. And the first free festivals were sort of small gatherings that tacked themselves onto large commercial festivals, particularly the Isle of Wight in, I think it was 1969 or 70, when, you know, Jimi Hendrix played and a number of people camped outside the fences and were entertained by Hawkwind. And I think that was, you know, the idea sort of got rolling that you don't just have to squat houses, you know, you can go out and squat the countryside as well. And by the end of the 70s, there was a whole circuit of free festivals. But I don't think there was as much trouble in those times as there is now about the whole phenomenon, because it was smaller, certainly, but not very much was known about it. It didn't really make the newspapers on a big scale the way things do now. The Beanfield, when Stonehenge was stopped, was when the whole thing really sort of came to prominence. But people forget that there was an equally, or perhaps even worse, incident at Windsor Great Park, which, you know, caused a huge amount of commotion and a huge public outcry. And in fact, the result of that was that the following year, the government actually provided a site for a free festival at a place called Watchfield near Oxford. So when we start to hear calls now that the government should provide sites for festivals, I mean, there is a precedent. And people would go to festivals in cars with tents, or just on foot, or hitchhike, or whatever. And as there were more and more free festivals, people started to sort of get a vehicle and kit it out for the summer. And it was then that the Sunshine Circus was born, which was the first tag. The Sunshine Circus became the Convoy. The Convoy became the so-called Peace Convoy. And the so-called Peace Convoy then became the Medieval Brigands. And then finally, in the 90s, a tag that makes more sense than all the others, the New Age Travellers.
There are a number of dropouts, and there are a number of middle-class dropouts. And that's perfectly obvious by their speech and by the sorts of things they do, their musical talents and so on and so forth. And there are a few university dropouts. And then there are a lot of people who would otherwise be living in bed and breakfast accommodation in cities and who've actually used a lot of enterprise and initiative to get themselves travelling homes, because you can actually get hold of these vehicles relatively cheaply. And if they want to live a life on the road, it's obviously preferable to a cockroach-infested, unsatisfactory dwelling, you know, in a big city, and certainly to sleeping, you know, in a cardboard box in the Strand or something like that. So there's that group. And then I think there are other groups of wandering people. I would call them, you know, people really on the margins of society. I mean, they do a bit of thieving, they poach, they tend to be rather aggressive and intimidatory in their manner, and they tend to take over public space in a way which people feel very threatened by.
One person who was seriously threatened was a Welsh hill farmer, Stanley Pugh of Kerry in Powys. He met the travelling festival goers last month on his doorstep.
There were hundreds. They'd got the tractor pulling posts up out of the fences to burn, and they were carrying sticks and lighting fires all over the land, and got the music in, and they were having a grand time, and skips, and water was provided by the council, and even stone in the gate for them to get in and out. And they never asked me any permission to put them there. 12 ewes and 4 lambs were killed. And others were damaged. They've been dying since. I never knew there were people in Britain like this. I heard talk of the hippies, but I didn't think they came in such large numbers. The police and the farmers can do anything with them.
How much does it cost you with the damage?
Thousands. The fencing is more than £1,000, and the damaged sheep, I can't put a figure on that yet because they're still dying.
Is there any possibility of compensation?
None at all. I checked with insurance and they won't pay out any.
And Mr. Pugh's horror is shared by almost all farmers. The National Farmers Union North Wales manager, Emyr Hughes, has had to start an early warning system involving both police and farmers throughout his region. They call it Hippie Watch. The farmers have lost all sympathy with the travellers.
They don't appreciate, as probably many others don't either, that farmland is in fact the farmer's factory floor. And without that essential land, he just can't carry on his business. In Kerry, for example, there's more than 100 fires been lit on the ground. The firewood, it was the farmer's fence posts. What was left in the embers were staples, nails, hinges, all sorts of metal. And, of course, the first thing that if a fortnight or a month after the land had been cleared of New Age travellers, that the farmer turned in livestock again. The first thing that a cow would do would be to nuzzle up in the cold ashes, they being minerals, and bovine animals anyway like minerals. And, of course, they'd swallow a nail or they'd cut their hoof on a broken bottle of glass. So that really means that anyone, any farmer, who has that sort of problem, he is forced to plough his land, to leave it barren, while the crop is established, and that could be anything up to sort of 12, 14, 18 months before a new crop is established.
So whatever the travellers think of themselves, society largely sees them as quite the opposite. It's the police that have to keep the two sides apart. The Deputy Chief Constable of Hampshire, Michael Mylod, is just one of many senior officers who've had to deal with such incidents.
Basically, we have a societal problem. We have what I see as the emergence of an underclass, for whatever reason, and the police service is finding itself in a position of having to deal with it almost exclusively, and I think that's wrong.
But in general terms, when you're talking about it as a general social problem, surely the travellers are much as part of it as the people who live in the villages which they were trying to invade.
Well, yes, of course they're part of society, but if you're part of society, you have to play by the rules that are laid down for the decent running of society. You don't make loud music all night and keep people awake. You don't block roads with vehicles. You don't invade other people's land. That doesn't make you part of a society. That makes you an enemy of it, surely.
And some travellers would agree. They now stay away from festivals to keep out of trouble and conflict. They tend to be older, have stable relationships and children. Jay, who I discovered living on a green lane near Andover, travels very peacefully in a self-built gypsy caravan towed by horses. I climbed aboard his day cart.
Oi, 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 come on, she's getting a bit... Go on then, get on. Good girl.
Is it more difficult with horses and a cart to actually find places to live?
It's easier because people aren't so worried about us somehow. We're more of a tourist attraction than anything else. So people enjoy it. Here comes my other little horse, look. You can see him running up the drive now. He's all excited because he's on the chain. He shouldn't be.
They're all escaping. What made them all escape today?
It's a crazy mad day. That's what made them all escape today.
But, so do farmers, in fact, actually welcome you because they find you interesting?
No, farmers never welcome us anywhere. A few, that's not fair. A few of them do. Dogs seldom do. And farmers in general have got their livelihood at stake. And
how long have you been on the road?
About 13 years, 14 years.
And can you make a living out of the horses?
Yeah, well, we try. It's not so much out of the horses. In the wintertime, I haven't done it yet, but I'm hoping this year to go up to Wales and do some logging.
Do you always try to make a living? I mean, do you sign on?
No, I never sign on. I haven't signed on for, well, I say never sign on. I haven't signed on for 5.5 years. We don't need it.
So, do you think all travellers should be self-sufficient in that way?
I don't think for anybody else but myself, really. I don't have opinions about other people's lifestyles. If they feel the need to sign on, then obviously there is a need to sign on. Go on, go on, go on, go on.
A quick trot to get up the hill out of that hole underneath the railway bridge. And I'm nearly slipping off because there aren't any proper seats.
Ease up, ease up.
I've found that almost all those involved think something's got to be done, that the constant confrontation, however the police handle it, is becoming unbearable as well as expensive. For the government, the phone calls from the angry shires have become vociferous this summer. Councillor Mrs. Anne Bailey of Hampshire lived for a whole weekend with travellers around her home in Otterbourne. She doesn't accept that simply moving the travellers on and on is an effective method of coping.
You still feel very threatened, whether they're behaving or not. A large group of people descending into your village is very threatening. I think it's time that we face the fact that we have an activity that's taking place now. People want to do it, and all we're doing is playing a game of cat and mouse from county to county and chasing the problem around. Now, how you control it and how you look after it is another question. But at the end of the day, you have people go down to the seaside and you make major roads, you widen them, and you make it possible. What we have to do is find suitable sites, charge the appropriate price for these people, and let them get on with it, because in a few years' time, it's just a fashion. It might well go away.
And the police aren't really happy with their task of picking up the pieces. In one of the worst instances a few years ago, one particularly large convoy of travellers was moved forcibly across 7 counties, with each force after another washing its hands of the problem. Deputy Chief Constable Mylod is the senior officer most recently to have made this point to a Home Office minister.
It's undoubtedly a social problem. There's much talk of giving the police additional powers. My own view is that the powers we have are adequate. There are adequate powers for arrest, for offences of crime. There are adequate powers under the Road Transport Act. What I think we are in danger of doing is that we have a social phenomenon which people are batting onto the police service to solve, and that we cannot do.
This week, the Department of Environment have made their proposals to give the police more powers by making it a criminal act rather than a civil trespass to park a caravan on land without the owner's permission. Under new instructions, the Department of Social Security will no longer pay benefit to any traveller who will not stay long enough in one place to prove that he's available for work. The Home Office are preparing their suggestions. The other group which have to bear the brunt of this major social problem, the farmers, also think that it's grown beyond what can be coped with by local communities. David Naish is the Farmers' Union president.
The law will have to be shaped to make it possible to allow groups to settle in certain areas when the area has been approved for the right reasons, when the right sanitation can be dealt with, when there is education for children who are involved in the families that are travelling, when it's possible to prove whether or not they're claiming social security for the right reasons, when they're genuinely searching for work. All those things, it's a lot of government departments, but it has to be addressed by government as something that the law must face, so that as law-abiding citizens, the rest of us aren't, in fact, the victims of malpractice.
But landowner Lord Cardigan goes further. After many years' direct experience of the people involved, whether in secluded Savernake Forest around his home or in courts up and down the land, he believes that the travellers are always with us and that we have to find somewhere to house them.
I think these people are entitled to say, we understand you don't want us in Savernake Forest, Cardigan. You will know we're not allowed anywhere near Stonehenge. The list of places where we're unwelcome is a very thick volume indeed. Tell us, where can we go? And until I and the system and the police and the establishment can answer that question and say, I'm afraid you're not welcome here, you're not welcome there, you're not welcome in that other place either. However, there is that place over there. Until that place over there is found, it seems to be a rather unbalanced policy. They've got to have somewhere to go. You don't want them in your back garden, I don't want them in my back garden, but they've got to go somewhere.
Neither Lord Cardigan nor David Naish of the NFU nor many of the policemen I've talked to believe this sort of solution can be forced on the New Age travellers. It has to be on their terms too. Steve just wants somewhere to park up his home.
I know the piece of land I want, and it's in Spain. It's £5,000, and it's just a matter of time before I get down there and buy it. Because the planning laws and everything are totally different than here. If I bought a piece of land here, which I have looked into and asked farmers, they're not interested in, and even if they were, I wouldn't be able to live on it for very long because the council would kick me off anyway, because I haven't got planning permission. So, I mean, I would actually like to, you know, to purchase a piece of land to do something with, but it's not possible.
It's not that your attitude to travelling is changing then?
I must admit, I'm getting all this bad press recently. I'm getting a bit worried about it. I get fed up with people looking at me different.
It would be very difficult to find one answer to all the problems thrown up by the New Age travellers. Almost as hard to find any community prepared to house them. Their members are always changing, and the very nature of many of them is to set themselves apart in a form of rebellion. For instance, the ones known as crusties, because they are always deliberately encrusted with dirt. They want to be treated with horror by so-called normal people. Professor Terence Morris discounts the present ideas coming out from Whitehall as simply political, rather than effective long-term solutions. He warns that all this happened before in the England of the first Queen Elizabeth.
Curiously enough, Elizabethan England, which has many, many parallels with our own time, in terms of a massive structural upheaval. There's a period of immense social upheaval, massive unemployment, skyrocketing inflation, starvation, large numbers of sturdy beggars on the roads and so forth. And the Elizabethans made an awful lot of mistakes. In some of their legislation, they ordered that beggars be taken to the parish boundary and there whipped and to be sent on, pause, to the next parish, you see. Now, in a sense, if we're going to move on the travellers, we haven't done any better in 400 years. Towards the end of the period, with the development of the Elizabethan Poor Law, you can see long-term strategy coming into play. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go back to the workhouse or the poor law or anything like that. But what I am saying is that, there's an old saying that those who know no history are destined to relive it. And I think in terms of some of our social history, we're undoubtedly reliving some of it.
Dan, Natalie, do you mind if I take you out of the harness?
No, of course.
I don't know many of us that are really doing it just to stick two fingers up at society. It's just, I think really what we are is we're the reversal of what was of urbanisation. We're de-urbanisation, if you like. We're going back out into the country where we all came from. None of us really feel comfortable in the cities. Quite honestly, I feel safer walking through a site full of hippies than I would, or travellers, or whatever they were going to be called, than I do walking through Brixton or parts of Manchester or Bristol or, quite frankly, it worries me to death walking through there, the things you see, the things you hear. I think the more people get to know us, the less scared they'll be.